great privilege and pleasure to be able to introduce our final speaker today, someone who hasn't graced the stage for too many years. It was here in 2005, my good friend Jeremy Narby. Now, Jeremy is a multifaceted fellow, and I don't have time to do justice to all his facets, but there are two that are of particular interest to us at Bioneers. First, though he operates quietly and behind the scenes, Jeremy has been one of the most effective activists in the struggle to defend indigenous rights of Amazonian peoples and to help those First Nations in their efforts to develop their own political, economic, and cultural institutions and projects. Jeremy was radically transformed by several years he spent living with the Ashaninka people in the Peruvian Amazon, an experience that really marked his worldview and really affected his professional and personal trajectory. He has worked since 1989 for a Swiss nonprofit named Nouvelle Planète, helping indigenous peoples of the Amazonia in land titling, bilingual education, sustainable resource use, the preservation of plant knowledge, and the environmental monitoring of petroleum companies and the resistance to their abuses. To give you a sense of how effective Jeremy's activism has been, in 27 years of fundraising, of activist fundraising, he's been able to assist indigenous peoples in the Peruvian Amazon to protect 12 million acres. That's roughly, to get land title to 12 million acres, roughly the size of New Hampshire and Vermont combined. And that's about 1% of the land mass of the Amazon basin. The other related, distinct but related facet of Jeremy's work is something he's more well known for. He studied history at the University of Canterbury. He got his PhD in anthropology not far from here at Stanford. And Jeremy is a deeply original but rigorous thinker who has taken on the challenging task of trying to reconcile traditional indigenous ecological, psychospiritual, and cosmological worldviews, which the Western world, to its obvious own peril, has been far too quick to dismiss, with the undeniable power of modern science. He has penned several provocative classic texts, The Cosmic Serpent, Intelligence in Nature, and others. And he has also led a few really interesting, fascinating expeditions to the rainforest, bringing biologists and medical researchers to examine indigenous knowledge systems. So this quest to forge a new worldview that reintegrates the indigenous understanding that humans are not above and beyond nature, but totally embedded in the web of life, with the best aspects of modern scientific thought, may be the most important ideological challenge of our era, one that the fate of our planet might depend upon. And I can't think of anyone better equipped to take on that formidable task than someone who combines the psychic courage to plunge into mysterious dimensions of consciousness with the unflappable sanity, centeredness, and intellectual discipline of a no-nonsense Canadian and Swiss anthropologist. So please join me in welcoming, all the way from Porrentruy, Switzerland, my dear friend, Jeremy Narby.
How are you doing? It's a privilege to get up here on this stage after all those dazzling speakers, and it's a joy to be back at Bioneers. So I'll tell you what I think I know. A long time ago, I spent a couple of years living with Ashaninka people in the Peruvian Amazon. And these are people who know a lot about plants and animals. In fact, they have a name in their language for just about every species living in the forest. But they spoke of plants and animals in a way that I found unusual, as intelligent beings with personalities and intentions, and who had kinship with humans. They even called some species Ashaninka, which was their word for themselves, meaning our people or our relatives. So white herons were Ashaninka. Manioc plants were our sisters. Small birds were our many brothers. armadillos were brothers-in-law. The Ashaninka tended to personify other species and to relate to them through kinship. Well, it turned out this view was fairly common among Amazonian people, but it took me a long time to come to grips with it. I began working as an activist and fundraiser for indigenous initiatives in the Amazon, and as an independent anthropologist, I also tried to make sense of the Amazonian point of view. And so this led me some 25 years ago to start looking into domains like biology, botany, and neurology. And at the time, it was already clear that biology confirms human kinship with other species, and that all living beings are genetically related. And scientists were starting to document intelligent behavior in all kinds of living organisms. The more science looked at the intricacies of the natural world, the more intelligence it seemed to find. So this encouraged me to look into intelligence in nature, a subject that concerned both science and indigenous knowledge. So in the early 2000s, I interviewed scientists in different countries who were working on this subject, only to find that there was a basic problem with words. So when a Japanese scientist demonstrated that a single-celled slime mold could solve a maze, Western commentators objected to his using the word intelligence to describe the slime's behavior. The problem was that Western thinkers tended to consider intelligence as a human exclusivity and had defined it over the centuries in many different ways, most of which were in exclusively human terms, making it difficult for other species to qualify, especially single cells of slime. So the word intelligence was human-centered, but so was the word nature. The dictionary defines nature as the phenomena of the physical world, including plants, animals, and the landscape, as opposed to humans and human creations. The word nature means everything that is not human. And anthropologists have pointed out that this is a concept specific to Western cultures. If you go to the Amazon, for example, and ask people there about their word for nature, for everything that is not human, they say they have no such concept. And on the contrary, they tend to view most other species as people like us. Yeah. Meanwhile, modern Western thinkers have tended to put human beings in a category of their own above all other species, arguing, for example, that animals are incapable of thinking because they lack language. But recent scientific research has just proved the contrary, and that even small invertebrates like bees think and handle abstract concepts. And numerous other species have systems of communication, some of which are close to human language. Take prairie dogs. They have a sophisticated form of verbal communication involving high-pitched chirps that they use to describe the world around them. They can describe intruders according to species, size, shape, speed, and color. A prairie dog may chirp, "Here comes a small, thin human wearing blue moving slowly," or "Here comes a tall, yellow coyote moving fast." Prairie dogs have brains the size of grapes, but they chirp away all day long, and scientists have just begun to understand them. Now there is strong evidence that numerous species think, feel, remember, and plan, and have language-like abilities and systems of communication. And this has led some Western thinkers to move away from constantly affirming the centrality of human beings. But here I'd like to mention a new concept that would keep humans at center stage: the Anthropo-Scene, a supposedly new geological era ushered in by human impacts on the biosphere. The word comes from the Greek anthropos, human being, and kainos, new, and roughly means the age of humans. It's not an official scientific concept yet, but it seeks to draw attention to human activities like driving species out of existence, poisoning ecosystems, deforestation, warming the climate, and leaving radioactive contamination and garbage all over the place. But naming today's geological age after humanity hides the importance of other species like bacteria and plants in the functioning of the biosphere. It also dilutes responsibility for ecological damage among humans. Indigenous people who oppose oil extraction in the rainforest are surely less responsible for degrading the biosphere than most people living in industrialized societies. Thank you. The problem is not humanity in general, but certain humans in particular. Thanks. And naming today's geological age after our species has narcissistic overtones, if only because no previous geological age bears the name of a single species. So instead of affirming the centrality of humans for the umpteenth time, it would be interesting to move beyond the anthropocentered frame that has enclosed Western minds for centuries and build a new, less destructive relationship with the other species living on this planet. Yeah, you don't have to clap, but the human-centered concepts of Western cultures have disparaged the other species of this world for so long that most existing legal systems consider plants and animals like objects, the only subjects being humans, of course. But this is starting to change. In divorce cases, some judges are starting to consider the family dog as a member of the family rather than as a possession. If the dog is a possession, the answer to the question, who gets the dog, is the person who paid for it. But if the dog is like a person or a child, the question becomes, what is in the best interests of this person? So dogs are starting to get a paw in the door of personhood in some places. But person is one of those human-centered words. Its first definition is a human being regarded as an individual. And this is one of the reasons why critics argue that attributing personhood to other species doesn't make sense. So it seems that it will be difficult for other species to be granted personhood, yet at the same time it's increasingly clear that considering them as mere objects is inexact. And here I'd like to point out that considering other species as persons is the definition that anthropologists currently give of animism. And when Amazonian people and other animists say that they consider a plant or an animal as a person, I take them to mean that there's someone home, a self rather than a thing, a sentient being with its own point of view. And even plants qualify. Now, scientists have demonstrated that plants perceive the world in their own way. A plant may not have eyes, but it perceives light through photoreceptor proteins that cover its entire body and that are nearly identical to the ones inside our own retinas. It's as if the plant had tiny eyes all over its body. A plant knows if you're standing next to it and if you're dressed in red or blue. Plants learn and remember. They make decisions, and they make plans. Even a blade of grass perceives the world around it, makes decisions, and acts on them. And this has led some philosophers to start granting personhood to plants, and other philosophers to disagree fundamentally. And here I think indigenous people can help philosophers think things through, regardless of whether sisters manioc and brother-in-law armadillo are bona fide persons or not. At the end of the day, you still have to eat something, or rather somebody. And the animist take on this question seems to be that eating other species means knowing them, identifying with them, and trying to see the world from their perspective. Among Amazonian people, the shortcut to seeing the perspective of other species is to ingest plant teachers. These are plants like tobacco and ayahuasca, and they tend to teach that other species have their points of view, which humans gain from taking into consideration. In this view, plant-induced trances give other species the opportunity to voice their complaints and demands, which humans can then take into consideration or else risk retribution. But working with plant teachers is tricky business, as we'll be discussing this afternoon. In animist societies, considering other species like persons often means treating them like relatives or allies. In the Ashaninka case, beneficent plants like manioc, corn, or peach palm are called brothers or sisters because they are so good and generous, whereas species that are hunted are treated with more distance, like brothers-in-law. And plants like ayahuasca and tobacco are considered like powerful and therefore potentially dangerous allies. But in all cases, using plants and animals involves recognizing the relationship one has with them. It turns out that Ashaninka people integrate into their kinship system not only plants and animals, but also visiting anthropologists. So I can give you an example of this kind of creative kinship based on personal experience. Back in the day, I was living in an Ashaninka community. Men would introduce themselves to me and say, "So, how should we treat each other, as brothers or brothers-in-law?" And I'd say, "Well, I don't know." They'd say, "Well, brothers if we want to be close and share things, and brothers-in-law if we want to be more distant, like trading partners." So I ended up with a couple of brothers and a whole slew of brothers-in-law. But the point is that this kind of kinship can be practiced creatively on an individual basis and in real time. Last but not least, the Ashaninka considered some species as harmful, in which case they referred to them as having once been human, Atsiri, but not as Ashaninka, our relatives. So poisonous snakes were not even brothers-in-law, which is not to say the contrary, of course. Thank you. Well, people who want to move away from the anthropo-centered scene that Western cultures have upheld for centuries can start by moving away from treating plants and animals like objects, and humans too, for that matter. Thank you. Human kinship with other species is real and confirmed by science, but after centuries of treating other species like objects and refusing to have relations with them, people in Western culture will need time to think this through. And here, animist societies provide a template. They may treat other species like relatives, but just like with relatives, some are close, others are more distant, some are beneficent, others are problematic. The nature of the relationship depends on both parties, and prudence and flexibility is required. That's how you treat your in-laws, right? I don't mean to say that people who speak in Western tongues should become animists, but rather that we can learn from animist cultures. Animists use kinship categories to think about other species, but in a Western context, other concepts like friend, neighbor, doctor, colleague may be more appropriate. People will need to think about this creatively and according to their own convictions. I initially thought I'd end this talk with a consideration of respectful living in the biosphere, but now I think that responsible is a better word than respectful because it's more concrete. It comes from the verb to respond. I think that living responsibly means living in a way that responds to the situation we're in and to what we now know. I think that responsible living in the biosphere means learning to see other species as beings like us, in that they have intentions, make decisions, and they know what they're doing, they have points of view. I think that responsible living in the biosphere means learning to take the interests of other species into consideration and allowing them room to live. And I think it means learning to relate to them and to think through the kinship we have with them. So now, to get started, I call birds amigos. I consider some mushrooms as my friends. And I think of the blades of grass as sisters as I mow the lawn. Thank you very much. Thank you.